Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Astro Consciousness channel. I'm Millie, and I am here to give you your forecast for the full moon in Aries taking place on October 17th. In this channel, we talk about the energy of the week ahead and how you can integrate it into your personal and spiritual growth. So I'm going to share my screen once again so that we can look at the chart of the full moon in Aries together. One of the things I want to start with when it comes to this lunar event is that this full moon in Aries is going to help us see what the Mars retrograde themes are going to be about for us. This full moon is ruled by Mars. Mars is within the degrees at which it's going to revisit during its retrograde period. And more importantly, Mars is at a wide opposition to Pluto currently direct in Capricorn. And Pluto in Capricorn is going to remain there for a few more weeks before it moves into Aquarius on November 17th. And one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that the level of consciousness that we have right now with whatever this full moon is bringing up, which I believe that a lot of the manifestations of this full moon are going to be felt the week prior, right, to the full moon, and the week of the full moon, and then the week after the full moon. And that entire period of time, we're going to experience Pluto in Capricorn. And therefore, we're going to, there might be this need of approaching the solution, of approaching whatever comes up with this full moon in Aries from an old paradigm, from an old perspective that is indicated by Pluto in Capricorn. When Pluto moves into Aquarius, we are being invited into that new paradigm shift, into that new way of thinking, into that new way of approaching things, into a new way of strategizing, if you will, how we move through life, right? And what that looks like, we have some idea because we have had Pluto in Aquarius over the last 2 years. We've had Pluto visit Aquarius, but never fully come in because it's retrograded back to Capricorn. But this time, I can definitely see a shift of whatever comes up with this full moon in Aries. And as we move through the retrograde of Mars in Cancer between December, January, and February, Pluto will be in Aquarius, and it's going to show us how different we have become and what we want to align with from a very authentic space. Now, authenticity in this case means living within alignment of your soul, of your values, of what you genuinely believe needs to be connected to you at this moment in time, as you, in some way, shape, or form, rebuild your life. I think that even if we're not completely rebuilding our life or starting from zero in some way, shape, or form, I think there is an element that we all feel of this is new, or I'm new at this, or in the past I may have confronted something in this way and now I'm choosing to do it differently because I realize how little effect that has, how unproductive that is, how little result it is, or how, again, unaligned it feels to who I am. So I wanted to get that out of the way, some overarching themes, which I will, explain a little bit more as I move through this forecast. So with that said, let's get started, right? So we have a full moon in Aries taking place at 24 degrees Aries. And the first thing that, of course, stands out is the fact that this full moon is creating a cardinal cross that is formed of the moon at 24 degrees Aries, conjunct Chiron in Aries, which I'll touch on in a second, both opposing the sun at 24 degrees Libra. And then the ruler of this full moon, which is Mars, at 22 degrees Mars, as I mentioned a few moments ago, in a wide opposition to Pluto now direct in Capricorn at 29 degrees Capricorn. Here we have a cardinal cross. Cardinal crosses in the zodiac represent action, represent new beginnings. I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again just in case anyone is listening for the first time or needs a refresher. The cardinal signs of the zodiac are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. And they are known as the initiators of the zodiac because every time that we get to that season of the zodiac, we are actually starting a new season in terms of the weather, right? Or in terms of stations, right? So at least in the Northern Hemisphere, Aries coincides with the beginning of spring. Cancer, the beginning of Cancer season coincides with the beginning of summer. The beginning of Libra season coincides with the beginning of fall. And the beginning of Capricorn season coincides with the beginning of winter. So here we have these leaders, if you will, that initiate new seasons at a cardinal cross. It's called cardinal because all of these signs are known as cardinal signs of the zodiac, at a cross to one another, right? They're creating a great degree of tension. Okay, so what does that mean? A full moon is an astrological event that represents an emotional culmination of something. Something comes to the surface. If it's something that has been buried, right, beneath the surface, whether of our psyche, of our emotional state, of certain conversations, certain interactions, full moons tend to illuminate with the full moon light what was there. And in fire signs, they tend to, especially with a cardinal cross, there tends to be a lot of anger around what comes to the surface, okay? So one of the things that we have to keep in mind with this full moon is that the moon is conjunct Chiron. That is such a sensitive point. So one of the ways that this can manifest itself as is that whatever comes to the surface, not only does it make us or someone angry, it also hurts our feelings a great, great deal. A moon-Chiron conjunction can represent sometimes a betrayal, it can, or a feeling of betrayal, but more importantly, because we have the Sun and Chiron together, which are deeply rooted energies, right? Because the moon is so much more about our psychic energy, our embodied energy that requires a lot of intention and presence to be understood. It's not something that is obvious. It's not something that is logical. It's not something that is cognitive. Understanding the moon represents understanding our needs, and understanding our needs represents spending time with ourselves in order to truly decipher what that is for us. Chiron is a deeply rooted wound that we came here to work through in order to gain wisdom from. So if this lunar event manifests for you in a way where something comes to the surface that you were somehow unaware of, either of yourself or another, there's going to be some pain there. There's going to be anger there. There's going to be a sense of betrayal, and not necessarily, this is what's interesting. I don't think that it's necessarily because someone has in fact betrayed you, but because I think when we have a moon Chiron conjunction, there is a trigger that is deeply rooted, and we can translate it as betrayal. So to me, whenever the moon is involved, this involves something from the past. And Chiron there is activating that wound from the past. So whatever it is that you're confronted with, whatever this full moon manifests, it is going to activate and trigger a wound from your past. So if we go back to the example of a sense of betrayal, maybe that person or the situation, maybe they did, maybe this does manifest in a literal betrayal, or they can do something in which they didn't fully take you into consideration, and you might perceive it as a betrayal and project onto someone a sense of betrayal based on something that happened in the past. Considering that this is the sign of Aries, this is quite the convoluted type of energy with that mix of the moon and Chiron there. And this isn't to say that Aries is a superficial sign, but it isn't a sign that spends too much time going beneath the surface of things. And this moon-Chiron conjunction is going to force us to not just look at the pain that's being triggered, to not just look at the manifestation that is being presented before us, but to ask ourselves, why does this bother me so much? And how is this asking me to get straight and clear about what is authentic to me and how am I aligned with that in my life? And so that moon Chiron conjunction, if we move to the ruler of this full moon, which is Mars, Mars is at 22 degrees Cancer at this time. To me, this feels, again, more of like something that makes you angry, and it's reactionary, right? Explosive, perhaps volatile. I don't feel like even the sun in Libra is going to be enough of an energy to fully mitigate the reactions of this energy. So what does that mean? I think it can mean a few things. I think one, it can mean if you're on the receiving end of someone's anger, resentment, because something is triggered for them, most likely from the past, again, with that Moon Chiron conjunction, you're going to notice people, be more in their anger, be more in their resentment, perhaps be a little bit nasty, a little bit spicy, right? Because Mars in Cancer, again, it is the anger, if you will, if we're keeping things as simple as possible with this interpretation, and Mars represents the anger of something from the past, Cancer. This theme keeps reiterating itself over and over again. And when we look at it from a much larger meta perspective, these are the things that we are ready to let go of. These are the things that we are ready to let go of in order for us to elevate in consciousness so that we can connect to this next chapter of our lives from a different state of consciousness. That's what this feels like to me. I'll get to why more in a second. But as we look at Mars in Cancer, there is, and I've talked a lot about Mars in Cancer. For those of you who have the eclipse guide, I talked about it there. I've talked about it in the last couple of weekly forecasts. But Mars in Cancer so much. This is something that occurred to me over this last week as I've been contemplating a lot of things. And I think that one of the things that Mars in Cancer is really trying to get to is the other side of the harshness that we are experiencing in the world, the other side of the disappointments that we are experiencing in the world and in our lives. Because we have to remember that Cancer in the zodiac reminds us of this energy that in its highest, purest, loveliest expression is the energy of unconditional love. And not just from a motherly place, but if the energy of unconditional love exists, it means that there can be an expression of unconditional love at large, right? And do I believe that we will ever get to a place of unconditional love as a collective in this human experience? Not necessarily. But I do think that as individuals, right, we can we have experienced or can experience moments of unconditional love, either through, the love of our mothers, right? If that exists there, right? If that relationship is there, we can experience the unconditional love of a mother. If you are a mother or a parent, the unconditional love that you feel for your child. If this has nothing to do with connecting to a parent, how do you experience unconditional love for yourself, right? Let's say that this full moon brings up for you something that you wish you hadn't done, something that you wish you had gotten right, some decision that you made that you now feel like, damn it, I wasted so much time in that, right? Whether it's a relationship or a situation, whatever it is. And there's a sense of anger that comes. Can you be the space of unconditional love for the part of you that is angry at yourself without trying to change it, without trying to feel better, without trying to tell it it's okay? Can you just be the space of unconditional love that says it is absolutely 100% okay for you to be in the space of anger for yourself? Because that's really what unconditional love is. When we really think about it, unconditional love doesn't look to fix. It looks to simply hold space and love anyway. And I think that so much of this Mars in Cancer is kind of like fighting for that sense of unconditional love, fighting for that sense of softness, fighting for the sense of unity and a sense of safety. And I really invite you to take those themes and take them outside of your personal experience. Really think about those themes in your personal experience and how they may land. But when you think of the state of the world and when you think about what's happening in the world at large, how appropriate is that? How appropriate are those questions? We see the news, we see stuff online, and what we're seeing is the deepest, darkest shadow of Pluto and Capricorn. The ends justify the means, trampling over people, a group of people to get to what I want to get, right? Uh, Whatever it is that you are experiencing in your external reality as you observe the world unfold and all kinds of events that are unfolding, what do you experience? What do you experience? And Mars in Cancer, especially in its retrograde during December, January, and February, which I find fascinating. Mars, and this probably isn't funny, but sometimes I have to laugh at the darkness of things in order to process them, uh, in order to just process them. I find it really fascinating that Mars is going to retrograde during the holiday season, for those that observe certain holidays in December and into a new year. Because during that time, Mars is again going to create exact oppositions to Pluto to Pluto. I think that at a collective perspective, that's going to manifest in things that are going to bring a little bit more shadow to the surface. But I think that at an individual level, it really, really is asking us, where do we stand? And not in terms of like a party or an ideal, but where do we stand as human beings of the world, as human beings who can, from a Cancerian place, right? Cancer is this energy that invites you to imagine how someone else might feel. And that may sound like something obvious, but it isn't. It isn't. I think that we live in a world, and this isn't coming from a place of judgment. I think it's really coming from a place of observation, and it's really coming from a place of observation of myself in the world. We live in our own bubbles. We live in our bubbles. Everything around us is designed to live in our bubbles, to where even if we have the best of intentions to be the best people that we possibly can, the most compassionate, the most thoughtful, it is sometimes hard to come out of that and to simply ask ourselves, what did that thing that I just said make that other person feel at their core? And I think that's when we really look at this, that download I had over earlier this week, I think it's like, it's how do I individuate, right? North Node in Aries, which I think represents so much of our individuation. And when we look at the definition of individuation from a Carl Jung perspective, it is the coming together, accepting ourselves as whole, accepting our wholeness of our light and our shadow. And when we have a good understanding of that, when we have a good awareness of what that is, we individuate because we no longer need something to define us or to tell us anything. We're well aware. And that awareness only creates more awareness, more awareness, more awareness of both the light and the shadow. So Mars in Cancer is really asking us to individuate, and will continue to ask us to individuate at a soul level, and to begin to imagine and to really begin to ask ourselves, Jesus, how would that feel to someone else? What has to happen in order for us to get to the other side of the shadow, of this darkness that we might be experiencing? The reason that we have to see and experience the shadow of ourselves, our family members, in our relationships, in our working spaces, and then in the collective at large with world events, is because the universe, spirit, if you will, is really showing us the things that have to fall away and have to die in order for us to really elevate into a different way of being and existing. So much of what I've described Mars and Cancer in the last couple of weeks as is what is worth fighting for. My family is worth fighting for. Those who are chosen family are worth fighting for. Those who I feel I love unconditionally are worth fighting for. I think if I dive into it a little bit more from an intuitive perspective, it's compassion and unconditional understanding of the suffering of others is worth fighting for. And I'm not implying by any means that let me rephrase that. I think that different people are going to go about that in different ways, and there is no right or wrong way. But if we're talking about this from an individual perspective, this is, again, it goes back to the question about who do I want to be? Who do I want to be in my life? How do I want to show up in my life? How do I want to treat people? So sometimes these types of questions, these types of deep, profound questions need to first come from something that is reactionary and from something that is volatile and from something that is angry. I think it was in my last week's forecast where I mentioned, if you experience someone's anger, please keep in mind that beneath that anger, there's probably a lot of sadness. A lot of sadness that you are unaware of, they are to an extent unaware of, right? Mars in Cancer, Cancer ruled by the moon. We're not always aware of our moon wounds. I think that's a lifelong process, right? Especially if someone has a natal moon with difficult aspects. So the anger, the outrage, if that is the way that it expresses itself, that's somewhat of a wake-up call. That's somewhat of a wake-up call. I'll share something. This is interesting. I'm just thinking about this now, and I'll share something personal with you really quickly. Last eclipse season in April, I had a blowout with one of my siblings, and it was a blowout unlike we've ever had before. This sibling is in Aries. I have a Mars in Aries. So it wasn't kind, it wasn't pretty, but that blowout sent me into the diving of, whoa, this is all of our childhood coming up. This is a lot of repressed anger. This is a lot of misplaced anger. This is a lot of things that need to come to the surface in order for us to have a much more honest, genuine relationship with one another, where we are not ignoring the fact that the shit that we experienced in our childhood actually affected us and is actually still beneath the surface of the relationship that you and I have. It was a painful experience, to be quite honest with you, but I am so grateful for it. I experienced an immense amount of anger. We were both, in true Aries form, very much against each other for a couple of months. We could not see eye to eye. We could not even have a conversation, because it would be that anger, right? Neither one of us was willing to step down from where we were, right? And I'm explaining these things because those are the very reactionary, those are the very superficial reactions of Aries energy. And sometimes they're necessary, because if you have people who are at a level of consciousness who can say, I'm so pissed off at you right now that I can't look at you, I can't hear your voice, I can't have a conversation with you, but I actually still do want to make this work. Even if we take some time off, we can come back when we're cooled off. It takes that. It took that, because it took us about 2 to 3 months to even get on the phone and be willing to have a conversation, which, by the way, was a conversation that lasted a few hours. And in the beginning of that conversation, we were still going at it. We still had to fight a little bit more from that Aries perspective. We still had to somehow try to beat one another in order for us to finally say, like, I'm tired. What is this really about? There was a lot of pain there. There was a lot of things that we were attempting to say that were not being said, but it took whatever it took. It took whatever it needed to take in that moment in order for us to get to the root of the thing. And then by the end of that second conversation, which lasted several hours, I think we had a very, very different understanding of who we are as individuals right now. Because especially when it comes to siblings, this is really interesting. And by the way, I have a stellium in the third house of siblings, which includes a conjunction, a Saturn-Uranus conjunction in there. So there's a lot that I'm meant to learn, right? From my siblings, from their relationship to my siblings. When we include the trauma in there that we experienced as children, that literally shaped the way that our brains formed, that shaped the tolerance of our nervous system and how we move through this world as adults. There's something frozen there. Trauma makes you freeze in time, and it can feel like you don't grow beyond a certain point. And that can very much feel like that in your body. So what we came to discover between my sibling and I is that, particularly me in this situation, I was being viewed as something that I no longer am. I was being held to a standard and expected to uphold that standard in a way where I'm no longer willing to. And that caused a lot of friction, because how dare I, right? So I say all of this because this story that I'm sharing with you, which is very personal, which has truly transformed, and I'm not kidding you, it has transformed me as a person in a year, has come with a lot of shadow. And I think that when we look at this cardinal cross configuration, the shadow portion of all of this is from Pluto in Capricorn. There is a lot that is being activated. There is a lot that we are being asked around what aligns with me, what doesn't, what am I willing to do still? What am I no longer willing to do anymore, right? The sun in Libra represents the sun, us, our identity, our ego, how we show up in the world in Libra. And it's saying, based on all of these triggers, right? Based on a Moon Chiron conjunction in Aries, based on a square to Pluto in Capricorn, based on a Mars in Cancer, which is highly activated right now and not in the best way, and is going to process this for the next couple of months, how are you going to show up in relationship? And I don't think that we know right now. I think that's still being defined for us right now. And I think we need to allow the explosiveness, the anger, the resentment, the volatility of whatever comes up to not give us the answer, but show us what we're meant to process, let go of, and work through over the next couple of months. That's what this is. Because the sun in Libra has a quality of, okay, well, let's find the middle ground, right? Let's hear each side of the story and see how we can make this work. That's not going to happen. And I don't think it's meant to. Because if it does, and I'm always second guessing myself as I say this, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. If it just does work out, based on the aspects, based on the alignments, I don't know how genuine it's going to be. I don't know how honest it's going to be. Because then we're going to be leaning into the lower expression of Libra, which says, you know what, this is quite the shit show, and I'm just going to pretend that it's all okay just so that we can keep things at peace, at an even keel, nothing's wrong here. And meanwhile, there's, the house is on fire, right? This is about our willingness, Sun in Libra, our willingness to show up, the Sun, to weigh what we're being shown, Libra, and to approach it objectively in a way where we are not lying to ourselves, in a way where we are okay with the discomfort of what this is bringing us. We need to be okay with the discomfort. We need to be okay with everything that comes up, because everything that's coming up, it's ready to be removed, to let it go. We can't carry this anymore. It's too heavy. It's too heavy. We're way too evolved, right? And this doesn't mean that we are enlightened beings and we function from a place of wisdom and light at all times. Not at all. But I think this, if we want to ground this, right? If I want to bring my Capricorn in, we know better. We're grown. We know who needs to take responsibility. We know how we need to take responsibility, right? If I go back to the example of that difficult interaction that I had with my sibling, that's really the approach that we both took. And mind you, my sibling also has a lot of Capricorn energy, and I'm a sun in Capricorn. So this was like, no, this is what I know, right? And this is how you need to take responsibility. And we need to experience a little bit of that. We need to experience a little bit of the friction. We need to be okay with that. If that's what's coming up, right? And then allow the Mars retrograde period, which we are in the pre-retrograde shadow phase of this already. We're already working through it, right? We're just going to be in the thick of it in December and January. We need to be okay with where we are. We need to be that container of unconditional love for ourselves and say, I am so pissed off right now. And not even be a container of unconditional love for someone else just yet. Because we cannot know what it means to do that for someone else if we cannot first do that for ourselves. We just can't. We don't know that. We don't know what it feels like, right? So can we be the container of unconditional love for ourselves while we may be processing and experiencing the things that this full moon in Aries brings us? And are we in the space to even be willing to ask, how can I look at this from a much more compassionate place? Okay, so the cardinal cross, I mean, really, I could stop this forecast here. I'm not going to. There are still a few more things that I want to keep touch on. I could stop this here and this would be enough for us to work with because this cardinal cross is significant. Cardinal crosses let us know that once the energy of that cardinal cross is finished, which I think is going to be between January, February, perhaps even March of 2025, either our external circumstances will be vastly different or our level of consciousness will be absolutely different from where it was at the time that the cardinal cross was at its most potent and tight within orbs of degrees. Okay. All right. So let's look at Jupiter in Gemini creating a sextile to Chiron in Aries. Both Chiron and Jupiter are teachers of the zodiac in different ways. Jupiter reminds us that when we go out into the world and experience different things, that is how we are taught by the world. Chiron teaches us by a wound that we carry that will, in some way, shape, or form, at some point in our life, be triggered to the point where we have no other choice but to look at it, right? So both teachers in different ways. Jupiter retrograde in Gemini, I've talked about this too, is what do I believe? What do I know to be true for myself? Jupiter in Gemini can be an overwhelming amount of information that comes from an external world. And if we get swept away by it, we don't know who we are in the middle of it. And I think that Jupiter retrograde in Gemini is the opportunity for us to ask ourselves, wait a minute. Where do I stand? What do I believe? What is my point of view? And if I'm being presented with a different point of view, can I be open enough to it? Does it align with me? Does it feel in integrity with me? Does it feel authentic to me? Because all of this is aiming for us to get to a place where we can live authentically. And to live authentically is to live within alignment of a soul-led life. And maybe that makes you roll your eyes. Maybe you're like, oh, Millie, you're such a hippy dippy. Maybe, right? Am I a hippy dippy? Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that the evolution of human interaction is moving to a space that has nothing to do with transaction and has much more to do with alignment. And in order for that to take place, certain paradigms that hold interactions from a transaction place need to break down. They need to dissolve. And so Jupiter retrograde in Gemini is the opportunity for us to get that straight within ourselves. Now, the sextile of Jupiter and Gemini to Chiron in Aries is, how are the things that are pissing me off right now showing me what I believe, what my point of view is, as opposed to simply leading on the lower expression of the Sun in Libra, for instance, and just agreeing with what everyone else is telling me, simply just to be accepted, to be chosen, and to be in relationship of some sort. So the sextile of Jupiter and Chiron is more of an invitation of self-inquiry. It's more of an invitation of introspection. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the cardinal cross that involves a very volatile Mars as it connects to Pluto especially, if we are simply reacting to the circumstances that we are being presented with, if that's all we're doing, if all we're doing is being reactive and pissed off, then there's probably not much introspection that's taking place, and a lot of outward looking, a lot of pointing the finger. And that's not the point. Is that right or wrong? I think at this point, how can we just, it's not about that. It's about the acceptance of what is. A higher expression of the sun in Libra, for instance, is how do I look at what is being presented to me and trust the information that I'm being given only because I'm asking myself, does that align with me? It either does or it doesn't. And to know what aligns with us at a soul level, to be in integrity within ourselves, right? To be an authentic expression of who we are, we need to have enough introspection to know what that means. And I think that this is an opportunity that we're going to be given during Jupiter's retrograde in Gemini. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Jupiter goes direct in February, right? And by that time, the nodes will already be in Pisces, Virgo, and Mars will be nearing the end of its retrograde period. There will be a lot of clarity that we're being asked to begin asking ourselves right now come February. So that's an interesting thing to pay attention there. I think it also matters that we look at Venus. Venus in Scorpio is very activated, very activated. Venus in Scorpio, Venus at 29 degrees Scorpio is saying, I want intimate relationships. I'm tired of superficial relationships. I'm tired of relationships where they are only a transaction. I'm tired of relationships where it feels like I have to be someone I'm not in order to be chosen, in order to fit in. I'm tired of being in relationships that I somehow feel obligated to be in, right? Venus in Scorpio, 29 degrees. That is another aspect of a lot of fire, of a lot of tension, right? And I know that Scorpio is a water sign, but there's something about Scorpio that can also be very fiery. And that Venus in Scorpio at 29 degrees is creating a sextile to Pluto in Capricorn. It's creating an opposition to Uranus and Taurus, and it's creating a trine to Neptune and Pisces. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are these bigger energies that are shifting and ushering us into the next level of consciousness, the next paradigm. And how interesting that it is Venus at 29 degrees Scorpio that's saying, I'm sick and tired of these superficial relationships. I either want something meaningful or not. I want something from a soul level or nothing at all. Is connecting with these three big guys in the sky and not in terrible aspects. Even the opposition to Uranus, Venus in opposition to Uranus is when I'm honest about where I'm at, I'm liberated. If I'm in a relationship where I can be the truest version of myself, that is a form of liberation. If I'm in a relationship that doesn't allow for that to happen and I somehow free myself from it, then that's a form of liberation. The trine to Neptune in Pisces. Yes, one of the more common interpretations of this is rose-colored glasses. I don't know that there's any room for that in this full moon. I don't know that there's any room for rose-colored glasses in a chart, in an event, at a moment in time in which everything else is not lending itself for that at all. So what does it feel like to me? Intuitively, what comes in is Venus in Scorpio is so clear about what it wants to experience that the connection to Neptune in Pisces is the willingness to be disappointed by some of the relationships in our lives. And in that disappointment, there is a level of honesty where we really get to choose whether we want to be in relationship with that or not. And that disappointment is actually healing because it's honest. Because it's honest, right? And so then the sextile to Venus, from Venus in Scorpio to Pluto in Capricorn is, yeah, the structure, the foundation from which I used to build my relationships. That's not the way anymore. To me, this sextile, interestingly enough, actually feels like a tower moment. I'm not a tarotist, but for some reason, intuitively, that's what's coming up. This connection between Venus in Scorpio and Pluto in Capricorn. It feels very much like a tower moment. And the willingness to let it happen. Because all of this is asking, what is the most authentic expression of yourself? What is most in alignment with who you are? What do you want at this moment in time? The amount of honesty that we are being asked to have right now is something that we cannot get around. And if we do, if we manage to, in some way, shape, or form, and I think we all do in some way, shape, or form, it's hard to have difficult conversations and interactions. The Mars retrograde cycle in December and January are really going to make it clear. And we're going to have to face what we're meant to face. But this is really going to, again, usher us in into something much more expansive, into something much more honest, into something much more aligned in the long run. Okay, this is going on a little longer than I like to make my video, so I'm going to stop here. Leave comments, questions, your experiences. I appreciate all of that so much, by the way. I know that I haven't been answering my comments in the way that I did, and I'm going to. It's just, there's been a lot going on, but thank you all so much for joining me week after week. So much love to all of you, and I will talk to you next week.